Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Cyber Exchange's Innovator Spotlight. I'm Armstead Whitney, the CEO of Aptega, and I'm really excited today to have a couple of great guests from IntSights. We have Stacy Moran, who's a Technology Integration Alliances Manager, and we have Chris Strand, who is the Chief Compliance Officer at IntSights. And today we're going to dig into really a lot about external threat intelligence and threat monitoring. I mean, something that everybody knows you need. But how do you really approach it? You know, there's lots of different ways you could approach it. And today we're going to learn about some really innovative ways that companies of all sizes can do to address this important area in your cybersecurity and compliance. Today we're going to really focus on interviewing Chris. So Chris, welcome to today's program. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Armstead. It's great to be here with you today.
All right, well, let's dig in. I think for those of us, just to kind of get a very high level overview, you know, what is external threat intelligence, and why is it that companies of all sizes should really pay attention to this particular area?
Well, I mean, it's a loaded question because external threat intelligence encompasses an awfully large breadth of information that we as cybersecurity professionals and compliance professionals work with on a daily basis and sometimes don't even know it. So it's important to recognize what cyber threat intelligence, external threat intelligence is, and how that applies to the programs and the threats that we're trying to counter in the industry. So really what it is a collection of intent, actions, and other aspects on the clear, deep, and dark web that are happening. And these take the form of all the different types of threats that we see, phishing attacks on social media, across different platforms and such. But it's a culmination of all of those various areas with context applied to it. And that's the catch where it becomes important to us as cybersecurity professionals. In order to make it actionable, is we need context built into it. So external threat intelligence and the collection of that, and anybody who is in the market of working with cyber threat intelligence needs to be able to apply that specific content to the instances of information that they're collecting.
So is it really thinking more about security instead of I have a firewall and it's sort of, you know, think of it as a barrier? This is a lot more proactive, where you're seeking this information, then being able, like you said, bring context to then take the right actions around that.
Yeah, and that's a good comparison to make, sort of comparing it to a firewall or something checking at the door to make sure things are allowed to come in, etc. That comparison is often made, and that views cyber threat intelligence as a commodity, essentially. So sort of like a firewall is saying, no, you can't come in, you can come in, based on a policy. The problem with that is that's static information.
Right.
And to make it actionable, you need context applied to that. So it's that prioritization and context in conjunction with that data that makes it actionable and valuable to the cybersecurity process.
And so you're gathering all this information, you're sharing it all the way across your customers. And I'm guessing that it's very fast, real time. As new threats emerge from the dark web and other areas, you're able to really capture those trends and then push those out to your customers.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So the idea is, here at IntSights, what one of our capabilities is, and what we focus on in the industry from that standpoint is and what we call it is democratizing threat intelligence. So what we're doing is we're making threat intelligence available and accessible to the wider range across any business process or any business. And that involves actually targeting that threat intelligence. Just the way that the cybercrime market will target specific industries, well, we do it in reverse. We target specific threat intelligence patterns to make that make sense for you and your business or your particular business use case.
Well, you mentioned that companies of all sizes can do this. A lot of our audience members don't have, large SOCs or big, security engineers always looking at these things. So for those organizations that don't have large security teams, how can IntSights, or what's the sort of recommendation on how that can work? Is it something you're taking very complicated and making it really digestible to almost any sized organization?
Yeah, so that's one of our main approaches, and this is why we've sort of shifted our focus a little bit over the last little while to, in fact, put a large amount of resources and time and efforts towards the SMB market. Those, to be able to stand behind our tagline of democratizing threat intelligence, we have to provide, I'll say, quote unquote, easy solution for that
Right.
mid-market that so needs context in their threat intelligence. So, and the way that we're approaching that is exactly as you're saying, aligning with the specific business use cases. And that gets down to even aligning with whatever they might be doing. So if you take the retail industry, for example, or smaller mid-sized retailers that want to take advantage of threat intelligence, they don't have time nor resources to hire huge SOC teams, to hire huge analyst teams and intelligence teams, and then glue all those together, apply that to a framework, work out all the different variables associated with that to come up with their conclusion as to what their cybersecurity policy is going to look at. So with the amount of time it took me to say that, that takes years in some cases for many organizations to get to that level of maturity. So we want to be able to counter that and allow them to, take some of that work off of their shoulders. Start by, some of our efforts again on those lines are aligning with specific, and it gets really granular into specific verticals like retail, let's say. And then from there, align with their needs from a cybersecurity perspective. Many of the retailers obviously have to comply with the data security standards, the PCI DSS.
Right.
So they also have the added burden of finding a framework that will help them plug their cybersecurity policies into PCI. Well, if we can align that for them, if we can find threat intelligence that is, let's say, targeted against retail, or is reconnaissance that might be happening, let's say, against the retail market or against retail infrastructure and e-commerce and brick and mortar, then we can tell them, then we've taken that phase not away from them, but we've done that phase for them. We've actually aligned with that particular business use case. And then heck, we can take it a step further and say, well, look, this particular threat pattern is indicative, but also supports it supports a specific requirement in the data security standard that you have to align with.
From you, as you described, kind of the best way to approach threat intelligence is that verticalization. And I think that's so incredibly important for everybody here to listen to. That, like you mentioned, you could be in retail or in energy or in commercial real estate or healthcare, and the threats that you're going to be seeing are very, very different. And so are you able to package those different verticals up specifically, then that threat intelligence is packaged for those different verticals? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at is basically we're taking the process of gap analysis and what we coin as digital or data footprinting on the clear, deep, and dark web, and packaging that into specific vertical use cases or sector use cases. So
That's
that you can get
fantastic.
sectorial information based on your threat intelligence that can answer those questions for you.
And we're going to see a little more about the product through some exploratory, maybe some demo views here in a few minutes with Chris. So we look forward to that. You mentioned some of the privacy frameworks. So a lot of companies are following, you mentioned PCI, HIPAA, SOC 2, GDPR, ISO, and do all these frameworks have a threat monitoring, threat intelligence component? I would think they would.
Most of these major frameworks are starting to entertain an intelligence component. So the idea of collecting threat intelligence and prioritizing it and making it actionable, it's all built into all those frameworks. If you look at any of the common frameworks, the NISTs, the ISOs, everyone's, you mentioned the SOC type 2s, 2 type 2s, they all have that component baked into them. But what they don't have is it's not a prescriptive requirement. There are some risk frameworks where it's a prescriptive requirement. So if you're in banking and you follow the FFIEC and follow the cyber security tool to get your risk maturity model laid out for you, there's actually a section in there called threat intelligence. So it's explicit. You need threat intelligence. It's done. So you have to go and figure out which is the best one that you can collect. But in the common frameworks, it's an element that's in the entire framework. Mm-hmm. So they're almost doing it in reverse, but it is definitely a major component of being able to, in essence, the ability to prioritize and pull context out of your threat intelligence is, in my opinion, eventually going to become a steadfast requirement.
Absolutely. So if we're following some of these frameworks that explicitly says these are threat intelligence and the monitoring is really critical, how are a lot of companies, especially kind of in the mid-market SMB space, handling that today? Because a lot of these organizations might have an MSP, for example, that they're outsourcing security. Maybe they have an MSSP if they're going a little more robust, but is there a misconception that organizations think, oh, my IT provider is already doing all of this? I mean, should they be asking a lot more questions and maybe trying to get more ownership of this themselves?
I think that one of the problems there is they don't know what questions to ask. Because of the maybe the size of the organization or the amount of budget that they're able to put into those particular teams, and also the number of tasks and different business lines that those teams are responsible for reporting on. They don't necessarily know what the questions are to ask. And I think this is the piece that's been inflicting the SMB and the mid-sized market for such a long time, because just the simple case that you have a single individuals with multiple responsibilities, and this is not their subject matter area. This is not what they deal with in all the time. So they need solutions that can sort of pre-compile that context for them, so it helps them both ask the right questions, start asking the right questions, both externally and internally with their teams, but also build up the business case for budget within their teams to be able to say, look what this is going to bring for us if we invest more in this particular area. Because that, as we know, this is often the bottleneck in most organizations, is getting that buy-in from the rest of the organization and getting people to pay attention, especially the ones who hold the checkbooks, to put into the organization, and allow you to carry on and basically beef up your cybersecurity policy and program.
Yeah, and as these frameworks become more widely embraced and adopted, across the world, that requirement's going to have to be addressed. So you guys are in a really great position to do that. Well, I'd love to have you take the screen and just show us a little bit more about how IntSights works and kind of approaches the market. So if you'd like to grab the screen, I will stop share and let's take a quick look at the IntSights way.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right. Looks great.
All right. So I'm going to take you through. So we've been talking about the need for, particularly, there's a number of themes here that I'd like to sort of center in on here, focus and zone in on. One of those is, the ability to collect context quickly. So the SMB market, one of the biggest things they need is a quick way of going in and seeing what their posture looks like, and getting those answers. Like we said, how do you know what questions to ask? Well, you need a starting point. You need some context to be able to ask those questions, and then apply that to your particular industry. And one of the ways that we do that is with, what I term as digital footprinting. It's essentially, we talk about threat intelligence, but your digital footprint is those digital breadcrumbs that you have out in the clear, deep, and dark web and across all your digital existence of your company, essentially. So we're looking at the IntSights dashboard here, and there's a number of things that I want to focus in on. I'm going to go in and actually look at some core areas here that help to prioritize and contextualize your threat intelligence view. So we're collecting a lot of stuff here, and we're giving you a number of different answers to look at. But essentially off the top, the first thing you're going to want to do to figure out, okay, what the heck is my posture? How do I even know how to prioritize in specific areas? Well, you can start by looking at your digital footprint. Now, as a cybersecurity professional, I usually start with the most critical stuff. So I look on the dark web first, because if there's any reconnaissance happening against your organization that involves your data, you definitely want to know about it. So at IntSights, we already roll this stuff into specific use cases, things like VIP leakage and general data leakage that's critical, and or attack indicators of attacks that are prominent on the dark web, or maybe there's lots of mentions of those, and these are eminent, these attacks at this point. So to go into any of those, you can pull in some more context, again, to start building up the profile of what types of questions you want to ask. So immediately you're going to get a lot of information on both your digital footprint and the overall theme in the industry. Now I'm looking at attack indicators here, which again are usually of most interest because you're going to want to get pointed into the right direction as per what's out there. Things finding like a bot server holding company consumer credentials, things like that. This is serious stuff because what this is threat intelligence that's been utilized. It's already probably been sold. It's been hosted. It's illicit at this point, and it's actively, it's active, which means, and if it's your data, then you really need to take action because this is active stuff. So this is the really important stuff, and this is across the board. As we said, we're looking at active threats at this point. But now to analyze the digital footprint a little bit further, you could go in and look at things like VIP credentials. And this is a common one because, if you get the keys to the kingdom and steal a bunch of user IDs, you definitely want VIP credentials because that gives you a lot of ability to do all kinds of nasty things across within the industry from a cybercrime perspective. So here we have details of a particular VIP for sale on the black market. Now, as a company, you got to know about this because this is pre-intent. So this is your digital footprint, and this is your digital footprint on the dark web being put into action. Again, nothing might have happened with it yet, but you sure need to know about this. So again, this gets into the idea of understanding your digital footprint. Now, I'm going to go back to the dashboard one more time and deal with data leakage because we were talking about data privacy mandates and a lot of different frameworks as well as mandates that deal with the protection of data. So we talked about PCI DSS, and we could be talking about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, or the CCPA, and I could go on and on because there's so many now that we've lost count. But the idea of your liability can greatly increase if you have data that falls into the bucket of one of these particular data protection mandates. So any type of data. So that's why it's incredibly important at this point to get a handle on what your digital footprint looks like. So here we have all the various instances of data leakage, essentially, and where that data is sitting, who is taking it, what they're doing with it, etc. So again, it's a different view of the data. But now what we're starting to do is align that. You can see that we put some tags on some of these. So in this case, there's login credentials available on an infected machine, et cetera, across my company. But we've tagged that with HIPAA and GDPR. So what this is doing is telling you that essentially you have your data, it's out on the dark web, it's active, and it relates to the GDPR and HIPAA.
So you're out of compliance, basically.
You're basically out of compliance at this, or you could be. The potential is there to be out of compliance because maybe something hasn't been done with this. So a lot of data spoofing attacks, they'll make a data request or they'll steal your data, but not for ransomware to get you to pay. Well, they will get you to pay, but they'll say, hey, I'm going to expose this data unless you pay because you're liable under GDPR and HIPAA. So this is telling you that additional context to say, not only has this data been stolen, this is important to you. And by the way, you are non-compliant with HIPAA and GDPR because this data is out there. And this is happening more and more these days because, again, with the incredible growth and evolution of data that's under this particular concern with these different data mandates and such.
Now, Chris, it seems that with the recent pandemic experience that we've all had, you see about all this data now going to the cloud for the first time. In fact, you read a lot of research publications, they'll say that the cloud market just accelerated by 10 years because of COVID. I'm guessing the more data that people are pushing in lots of different places, lots of apps and lots of different systems and outside the firewall, that these threats would just increase tremendously because of that as well, because you're exposing your data to a lot of other sources that maybe before you wouldn't have done that with.
Absolutely. And in many cases, businesses aren't even aware that their data is, number one, exposed to these different sources from this perspective, or that it's even under the jurisdiction of any number of these different privacy mandates.
Right.
So it's a growing and evolving problem that I think is kind of snuck in through the back door because data has suddenly become so much more valuable. And if you think of what's happening right now in the healthcare industry, with like take HIPAA for example, or HIPAA related data. I mean, think of the evolution of this now. You're going to have non-traditional businesses collecting data on the healthcare of individuals. So your healthcare record now could be exposed to 10 times the number of organizations,
Right.
and a 10 times bigger threat surface than it traditionally was, because now you have airlines that are going to be collecting information. Well, I don't know. I'm just predicting this, but before you know it, you're going to have to show that you're vaccinated before you can take a flight. Let's say something like this. Well, that involves an airline actually taking information on your healthcare record. Well, that's your healthcare record now being held by an airline, not by a hospital where it's regulated by HIPAA, but now by an airline. So how is that data going to be protected? We have to think of that. So to your original point, that data surface has grown exponentially, and so has the jurisdiction of what's going to be should be protecting and regulating that data surface as well.
Well, that's fantastic. I really enjoyed seeing the demonstration, and I've had no training on your platform, and it looked really easy to use, which I think our audience members love as they look at these types of solutions. So thanks for showing the demo. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna I'll grab the screen and we're going to just show everybody where they can find insights on CyberExchange. So we're just going to pull up the CyberExchange site, and cyberexchange.aptega.com. And to all of our customers that are watching this, you have CyberExchange integrated inside of the Aptega platform. And one of the great things about CyberExchange, I can come in and just, with my provider drop down, I just picked up insights and I said, well, what are the different categories that insights can cover? And these are just general controls, where you kind of see all the different areas, and there's many. Border security, I mean, it crosses so many requirements. But even if I'm following PCI, which is one of the examples Chris gave, and I'm going to say, okay, for PCI, how can insights help me with those specific requirements? And how now we see firewall configurations, which is the first major control family, and 1.2.1 as an example, all the way down to multiple controls, system defaults, securing applications. I mean, even there's show more, ID management. And the great thing about this is that you can license insights and have amazing coverage across all these requirements, versus having to piecemeal different solutions together and really not know where they connect and how they really solve these different issues. And so the great thing about CyberExchange is we've mapped insight solutions all the way across all these frameworks. So it's really, really easy and very intuitive to kind of see that coverage. And so when you pull up those search results, you want to see kind of a little more about their solution, just click their tile and you'll learn more about the different categories and subcategories that they address. You'll see the specifications of the product, how they're unique. You've got a great PDF here, kind of a one-pager to learn more. And the great thing about this is you can get a quote, or you can just say learn more, and you've self-educated. You've seen the great video that Chris put together, and now you want to learn more. So contact them right through CyberExchange. It's that simple. And then someone from Chris's team will contact you and give you a lot more information. So this will wrap up our session for today. Chris, I just want to say thank you so much for joining, and Stacy, thank you for being co-pilot today. Really enjoyed learning more about insights, and thanks again for joining us.
You bet. It was great to be here. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. And to all of you watching, this will be posted very shortly, and come back again next time for the next episode of CyberExchange Innovator Spotlight. Take care, everybody.